Hi, welcome back. We are so excited to be here today with Mari Mars. She has a captivating story of being both the wife of a priest in the Greek Orthodox Church and a sex therapist. Yes, you heard me right. There are so many difficult intersections in her story, questions about the expectation of being a woman in the role of a pastor's wife, and deep betrayal from her own parish community because of her profession. And yet, there is a gorgeous story of survival, of redemption, of growth and forgiveness. And interestingly, this gorgeous thread, the profound gift of music, served as a catalyst for that journey of redemption. Join us today as we talk with Mari. You will not want to miss this story. Hi, Mari.
Hi.
Thank you so much for being with us today.
Thank you for inviting
and
me.
being with Natalia.
We're so excited to have you today.
Thank you so much.
You have such an
Appreciate
incredibly
that.
interesting story. There's so many places we can go with it.
I know.
Right.
But I would like to kind of dive in. I mean, you and I have spent some time talking, but I wanted to dive into the underpinnings of what it was like as a child for you growing up in the Greek Orthodox Church. What was the influence, I should say, of the Greek Orthodox Church on your childhood?
It was grounding, I think is the first thing that I would say.
That's
It was-
beautiful.
I love that.
It was the center of our family. And it was a profound glue for us. I think it's no secret for anybody who knows us that we had a sort of tumultuous upbringing, my sister and I, in that we had restaurants that were demanding of our time and were not always the most financially stable. And the running thread through all of that my mom would say to us over and over and over again when things were particularly tough was, God will provide because he has to.
Oh, I love that.
And I still get choked up, honestly, when I think
So
about
sweet.
it, because it was true.
No, it's grounding. I mean, I was talking about my grandmother this morning, and she's just such a woman of faith, such a woman of prayer, and her life collapsed around her, and yet that faith held her
It's
up.
what keeps us moving when we're struggling too. It's having
Yeah.
that, being grounded on the fact that God is going to provide. Like even when you were under like turbulence, God's going to provide. So I love that.
Yeah, and I think for me that the almost caveat at the end of that, you hear people say God will provide all the time, but my mom would say God will provide because he has to. I found that so reassuring
So
as a
interesting.
kid, because it was like, oh, he really is going to provide. He has to.
So you clung to that.
I did. And I still do. And I actually offer that to some of my clients who are people of faith themselves, and who look for that as part of their therapy. So, yeah.
As we've talked in a couple of sessions preparing for this show, it has been so fascinating to me when I'll ask you certain things, you relate them immediately to some of what always went on in your childhood, what was going on in the church, and the music around it. You are always drawn into, well, at that time in my life, I was singing X because it was Easter at the church. And so I wondered if you would talk a little bit about music in your life.
Oh, music has defined my life since I think the first thing I could probably remember that was significant around music was elementary school, 4th grade minimum. And it has been my way of communicating with the world and communicating with God.
It's your prayer, it's your meditation.
It is, absolutely. I'm a chanter in the church, so for us, chanting is a form of prayer. It's not just a performance. It's not just, okay, we'll sing a hymn. It's no, this is how we're going to pray. So it has filled every aspect of my life.
That's beautiful. As one musician to another, totally get it.
Yeah.
And we'll wrap back with the music a little bit later. And, I think how the transformational power of music, especially sacred spiritual music,
Yeah.
how it can drive you to all kinds of places, in your life.
Mm-hmm.
So to get to kind of the nut of your story, you very young, I think 24-ish,
Mm-hmm.
married a man who was about to be ordained as a priest in the Greek
Yes.
Orthodox Church,
Yes, I
right?
did.
And somewhere in that journey, not too many years later, you decided that you wanted to be a therapist and to go to school. And in that therapy journey, there was a pivot. And you said, I want to be a sex therapist. So, first of all, I think there's a whole lot of confusion around what is a sex therapist, because in our layman's terms, we think, oh, you're helping people have great sex. Tell me what you do. What do you do as a sex therapist?
It's so funny that you say that. A lot of misconceptions about sex therapists come from places that people don't want to admit that that's how they think of sex therapists, and that's where they got the ideas of it. Yeah, so a sex therapist, that's a very large umbrella term. And the only reason that sex therapist is a term is because of the accrediting body that, that grants that term. So the accrediting body is one for sex educators, counselors, and therapists. So the counselors part is like doctors, physical therapists, people like that who give a little bit of advice or counseling around what you need to do next if you're struggling with pain or some kind of medical issue. Sex therapists are specifically people like me who do therapy that is specialized in any realm under this particular umbrella. The umbrella being that particularly marginalized populations come to us for specialized therapy. So that tends to be people with disabilities, people in the LGBTQIA population, people who are consensually non-monogamous. There's all kinds of people under that umbrella. So we say sex therapist, but there actually isn't necessarily a whole lot of that that's about sex, So we do help with intimacy. We'll have couples come in all the time. We'll have people come in, individuals come in who are saying like, I'm struggling with intimacy with my partner. I'm struggling with finding a partner because I have these issues around intimacy or whatever that looks like. Mm-hmm. So there's just a huge swath. One of the biggest parts that I do is working with women with chronic pelvic pain. So nobody gives a whole lot of thought to that, but the statistic is greater than 1 in 10 women have chronic pelvic pain. Right. Yeah. So it's a lot of issues there, and people don't tend to ask all the time. And I think that's one of the problems where that intersection between priest's wife and sex therapist is.
I mean, it's a little jarring,
Oh, absolutely.
Priest's wife,
but
sex
there's like
therapist.
so much taboo with sex, and people don't want to talk about it. They don't. So it's like what you just said. I had no idea of how many people suffer with that. Yeah. And I think people just don't want to talk about it because it's awkward. They don't want to feel like they're different. Or
they think they know what it is.
Yes, I think there's so many things that could be, people just kind of seclude themselves, right? Because they're afraid of being judged by it. But when you're saying these things and kind of defining, I'm like because I didn't know any of that. So I'm glad what Teresa asked. But what was your motivation to become a sex therapist? Like, it's certainly not the environment like grew up in, like very, Catholic. And how did that desire come to you of becoming a sex therapist?
Yeah, there were a couple of reasons. So I started out, when I went toward the therapy route, I started out heading toward crisis, trauma, and grief.
Okay.
Particularly grief, because of a couple of experiences that I had at the church with families who had lost loved ones. And I found a lot of fulfillment in being there for them and with them.
That's beautiful.
But as I started my program, my grad school program, one of the beautiful things that my program did was require that people in the program be in therapy themselves. Not all schools do that, which is another thing altogether. So my therapist that I went to just happened to be a sex therapist, and I didn't really realize that. So we started to do therapy, and I would go into her office and think, I want to be her when I grow up. You know, when we weren't really, we're not that far apart in age, couple of years maybe. So I started asking her, like, what do you do? Who do you work with? What are the kinds of populations you do? What extra training did you do? Those kinds of things. And she started telling me more and more about it, telling me more about the population she worked with. And she said, I work with women with chronic pelvic pain. I work with women who have sexual trauma. I work with LGBTQ populations. I work with people who are consensually non-monogamous. And the more I got to thinking about it, like between our sessions, the more I went, yeah, you know, I think this is actually what I want to do. I think I really have an interest in working with these populations. But the thing that stood out the most, I think, to me, was that nobody was working with these populations within the church.
Right.
Yeah.
These were all marginalized populations, not only in society, but especially in the church. And so I
mean,
thought,
that begs a lot of tough questions.
oh yeah,
And I don't know if I even want to go here. But just very lay terms, isn't the church the very place we bring our worst traumas, our deepest hurts, but you didn't find space in the church for these populations to bring forward their questioning?
well, yes and no.
Okay.
There are a lot of clergy out there who feel strongly about making space and who are not afraid to talk about it.
Good.
Thank God, my husband being one of them, our bishop being one of them, my spiritual father being one of them. I try to surround myself with clergy who are open to discussing these things, even if they don't necessarily, agree on every single, point that I want to talk about or that I believe. They want to talk about it.
That's amazing and profound, and I am thankful to hear that.
Yeah. Yes. I have found the theology of the church to be the most open and accepting theology, believe it or not, more so than even when you walk into liberal Protestant churches.
Mm-hmm.
I find
when you say the church, you mean the Greek Orthodox Church?
Yes.
Okay.
I find our theology to actually be far more open and accepting when one truly looks at what is written and what is believed by the church. It's that it kind of gets a little bit twisted by people who...
I was going to say, it's not the theology, it's how it's received by the people.
Yeah.
Right.
Right.
Which I'm going to say something about later.
Well, let me stop just for a moment, and hard question, and I just have to go here.
Yeah.
Gently. As we've talked, you have said that, as Natalia's saying, what was your motivation here? And you've led us through, this journey that's a really thoughtful one in why you went down the path. But you've also shared with me that there was sexual trauma in your past.
Mm-hmm.
What role did that play in your interest in helping others go through the tragedy and the grief of that kind of trauma?
In particular, sexual trauma, couple of things. Experiencing the healing that I did with my therapist, feeling her empathy, feeling her understanding. And I will never forget one particular time. It took me several years to disclose to her something that had happened to me. And I was very afraid that she was going to judge me, to be honest. Everybody's afraid
Sure.
that they're going to be judged, even by their therapists. And instead, she got out of her chair and she came over and sat down next to me on the couch, and she held my hand and she cried.
Yeah. So much healing just in that person saying, I get it.
Yeah.
And I hurt for you.
And just not feeling judged, and just that person just feeling your pain and just understanding where you're coming from.
Yeah.
Because when you were afraid of being judged and you're finally able to speak about it, and like that person's not judging you, it's like this relief, this like weight off your shoulder, and you're like, that monster, they were so big, suddenly it's not as scary anymore.
Yeah, the shame doesn't
Yes.
creep over you in such a big way. And thank you for sharing that. I appreciate your willingness to talk about that.
Yeah.
So you and I were talking about fast forwarding in your life, because we don't get to linger here all day long, and I wish we did, because there's so many parts.
Yes.
But you and I were talking about, my goodness, what's it like to be in this parish where you operate as a minister's wife? You're singing in the choir, you're a chanter, and you work as a sex therapist during the day.
Like, I have to know how was that? Because I can only imagine like being in that environment and showing up and say, hey, I'm gonna be a sex therapist now. Like, how was that how was that conversation? How was it received? Because the same way we didn't have like the full idea of what a sex therapist, most people don't. So I'm sure there was like probably a fear, right, of saying maybe, or even like, how was it received by people? Would love to know that.
Well, and how was it received by your husband?
Yes. Yes.
That's a good question. At first, there was a little bit of surprise when I came home one day and said, honey, I think I want to be a sex therapist.
Oh my gosh.
He sort of went, wait a minute, I thought you wanted to be a grief therapist? And I was like,
when did that change?
Yeah, I was like, so there's that, yeah. But I think, so first and foremost, it was making sure that I had the blessings of my spiritual father, our bishop, and our dean of the cathedral, because that felt like a courtesy to me, and it felt very important to me to know that I had their support.
And I want to stop you right there, because I think our listeners hearing that going, she wanted to be something. She was called to be something, and she had to go to the bishop and the spiritual mentor and this and that.
Absolutely
but
not.
But you didn't have to.
Absolutely not.
It
I
was a courtesy.
Did you do it more like out of respect for them, out of your relationship with them?
Yes, I did.
Yeah.
Because I knew that if anything were to happen, it would come back on them. Even to the point that at one point there was a group online. There are always groups online that chase after me, but there was one group online that had written a letter to the National Synod of Bishops, the national group of bishops, complaining about me. Had I not given that courtesy to my bishop, he would have been blindsided. I didn't want that for him, because that's difficult. Yeah. When one of your priest's wives is doing something like that and you don't know about it, that's hard. And I just didn't want that for him, as somebody that I'm very close to personally, who was a mentor,
So how did it change for you, like as you began to practice as a sex therapist?
Yeah.
And you are involved in this parish community, you're building it, you're helping build your husband's career.
Yes.
As a priest.
Yes.
What changed within your relationship in the parish and your relationship at home?
Yeah. So I also wanted their blessings, because I wanted to know that I was supported. And at first, things were great. I would have people approach me and want my help for things.
Oh, nice.
Then we got into 2016. 2016, the political campaigns started up and got to be very intense.
Yeah.
And so,
Divided so many people.
Mhm. It was just as divisive in our parish as it was everywhere else.
Mm-hmm.
And so things started to happen around me that I didn't know where they came from, couldn't control. There would be people who would march into the priest's office and tell them that they needed to control me. Yeah, can you imagine?
No,
No,
actually.
I can't.
Right. I say that with love, but really?
But control you
Like,
how?
Yeah, like what
Oh,
part do they
like,
want to control?
get me under control and silence me. You know,
Oh, what was
But silence what?
like what part of
that's
it?
a good question.
Like what were you doing that within the church that needed to be silenced?
I wasn't.
Was it like your profession itself, or is it like something that you were doing?
My guess was that they were probably referring to Facebook posts that were several years old, because by that point I was not posting things on Facebook because I had these people online that were chasing me, and I don't want anything. So my guess is they were looking at things that were years and years old, but it was just ridiculous. So so that's what I see that shifted. What happened behind the scenes for them, I don't know. But I think that divisiveness really created an atmosphere where people in real life, not just online, but in real life, were looking for people that to turn their attention toward, and to turn even their anger toward.
Yeah.
And I don't think it happened on just one side. I think it happened on both sides of the aisle, so to speak. It just so happened that
You were an easy target.
Yeah.
I was the target on one particular side of the aisle, you know? So the atmosphere clearly changed.
So you have 2016, and we have this collective shift as a nation, and it was not pretty. And it was deeply impacting how you balanced this profession you felt called to and your place as a priest's wife and building and loving a parish, right?
Yep.
But you managed for a while, even with all that was going on.
That might be strongly worded.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. But then it didn't. Then there was a time when it just didn't work anymore.
Yep.
Because
Nope.
can you give us a kind of the Cliff Note version of the rupture that happened between you and your parish community?
You say that so nicely.
I know.
I fondly refer to it as the witch trial.
I know I can't do it. I just can't do it. And we've talked about this so many times.
It's
I'm like,
okay.
I
It's
can't
okay.
say it.
Yeah.
You don't
So
have to give the specifics, but just help us understand where this huge divide happened that forever changed your life within the church, outside of the church, and your marriage.
yeah. Okay. Short version.
Okay.
I taught a Sunday school class with a close friend of mine, and it was moral issues in the church for 11th and 12th graders. And we would talk about, each week, we'd talk about a different issue. And so we gave out a syllabus. Everybody knew what we were teaching and when.
Okay, so you're teaching the Sunday school class,
Mhm.
and parents know what kids are going to be taught.
Yep.
Kids have been given a syllabus.
Yep.
You're assisting, you're not leading.
Right.
And the issues, which
Right. The LGBT issues.
I'm struggling to understand that a little bit.
Exactly. That's why I have the air quotes going.
Right.
Um,
And so what happened?
So I'll say this. If I made a mistake that day, it was that I allowed the kids to ask me their questions throughout the class instead of saying, hold your questions till the end. You know, I wanted everybody to be able to ask questions. So I was tasked with speaking about the sociological pieces, scientific pieces, anything that was not theological, basically. Which is why I find this whole thing kind of ironic. So, that's what I talked about. This was only a 45-minute class, by the way. It was
Okay.
not long. So we didn't even touch theology. We didn't even get that far. Class ends. All of a sudden, before the kids can even get upstairs, parents are complaining, okay, to our dean of the cathedral, our older priest. And long story short, it blows up into this huge deal throughout the week. And there are things being said about basically, it was said that I was telling the kids that they needed to go off and have sex to experiment and see if they are gay.
Oh my gosh.
And I was like,
my God.
that wouldn't even be good advice as a sex therapist. Like, that's not even a thing that I would, what?
Much less as a Sunday school teacher and the priest's
Right?
wife.
Like,
Yeah.
how long have you people known me? Like this.
Wow.
So let's go there. How long had you been in that church as Chris's wife?
At that point, I have to count on my fingers. 8 years at
Long
that point.
time.
But you also have to understand, I grew up in this parish.
Oh my gosh.
Oh,
Many
okay.
of these people I had known since I was 6 or 7 years old. So I'm not going to do that math. There's a reason I'm a therapist.
No excuses. I'm not excusing anybody here. This is a horrific
Yeah.
story of attack.
Yeah.
But there was something else at play. You were in, if I'm right, if my chronology is right, was this not right around the very early
Yep.
time of COVID?
No, it was long before that.
Oh,
This
okay.
was so where this ended up was October 16th of 2016.
Oh, so this
Okay.
is just
So-
after everything that was going through with the
Yeah,
election.
that whole week everything exploded. They're saying all kinds of things about me. There are phone calls being made to my friend who was teaching the class, to our parish council president, to our dean of the cathedral, Father Paul. Nobody talked to my husband. Nobody talked to me. Like, nobody
Oh, so
called
they
or
didn't
texted
ask
me.
you to, like, what happened? How
Nope.
was the class? Nothing.
Nope.
Oh, wow.
Nope, not a thing. Not
So there was no
Nothing.
opportunity for you to
For
like,
clarity or
no. In
clarify
fact, I was
anything?
instructed not to talk to anybody.
by whom?
By the powers that be. I don't want to like
Okay.
name.
Go ahead, yeah.
Okay,
name
no, I'm not
names.
asking you to name it. It's just very curious to me that in 2016, a professional woman with a degree, with a practice can be silenced. I'm feeling rage come up over my whole body right now
Yeah.
with you saying
Well,
that.
and I also want to say that I allowed that. I did allow that because I was told that this was the best way to handle it.
Did you believe that?
Not by my husband, by the way. My husband had nothing to do with any of this.
Did you agree?
I did not agree.
Okay.
It was an attempt to trust and do obedience.
So where was your husband in this week when this is all bubbling up and chaos is happening within this parish?
Oh, Lord, that poor man. He was trying his best. So throughout that week, there was a 4-hour parish council meeting held to discuss me.
Oh, wow.
And it's the first and maybe only time that he has ever stood up in a meeting and yelled at the parish council. Basically,
Well, good for him.
Yeah, right. Basically with that's my wife, how dare you all. And I was told that by other people. So,
But then there was another meeting.
yes, there was. So at the end of the week, this is the October 16th, there was a meeting in an attempt to like calm things down. All of the Sunday school parents were invited. And then it was open to Sunday school teachers, parish council members, basically everybody and their uncle to come in. And it turned into a handing around the microphone for people to hurl their insults, hand it off to the next person, and walk out. They
This
didn't
is
want to hear anything.
Were you there?
outrageous.
Oh, yeah.
Oh.
Yeah. I was sitting in the front
Outrageous
row.
in a way that I can't even fathom. It's like the highest level of bullying, and that's
It's like,
not even a
let's
good
all
enough.
sit here and throw the stones.
But I
Yeah.
mean, how does
And
that
nobody's
happen
defending
without
you.
anybody pulling it down, getting control of it? Your husband walking in and defending. How did that get to that point?
So my parents and my sister came. I was sitting there in my dad's jacket, crying uncontrollably. My sister tried to say something, and Father Paul came over and said, Mari promised me that you guys would not say anything.
Did you? Had you?
Yeah, in order to make it so that they were allowed to come.
Oh.
This allowed and not allowed stuff is driving me crazy.
Yeah, drove me nuts.
I mean, it's unfathomable.
I was about to check
Unconscionable.
myself into a hospital.
Because you were like, I was like, they already have you as a guilt. Like, you're guilty of it. Like, they're just having people to come and just throw it in your face that you're guilty.
Yeah.
Without having.
But guilty
It
of
does-
what?
That's the thing. It's like in any moment, it sounds like you were able to explain your side of the story or asked how you feel or anything in that moment.
Oh, nothing. So I was not allowed to speak, and my husband was not allowed to speak. And keep in mind that he is a priest, and he is not a assistant priest. It's not like he works for the church or works for Father Paul. He's an assistant. He's like a co-priest, basically. He works for the bishop, who, by the way, was furious about the whole thing and was like,
Well, good. I'm
don't
glad
you
somebody
dare
was.
quit, Mari.
Mhm.
He's an angel.
So let's jump to the end of that. Is it? I don't even
Yeah.
know how to talk about it. I'm so angry right now. Let's jump to what happened next. So this happens. You're accused of what I can't even name, really.
Yeah.
You're not allowed to defend yourself. Your family's not allowed to defend you. Your husband, who's the co-priest, is not allowed to defend you. And somehow that closes and you go home.
I want to tell you one thing, though.
Okay.
The people who were allowed to defend me were the kids.
Oh.
The kids stood up
Oh,
and
wow.
said, I don't know what y'all are smoking, but we were in that classroom and you weren't. And she didn't say those things.
I'm
That's
so
a really
glad.
courageous thing for a 16 or 17-year-old to do.
And they all did it.
Oh, wow.
There were only like 2 kids, 3 kids maybe, that didn't stand up and say things.
Well,
Mostly all of those kids. And then at one point, one woman got up, and God love her, I love this woman. And we weren't like friends at the time. I mean, I knew her, but she got up and said, I think we need to just establish what's happening in this room. And she turned to me and she said, I am sorry. I'm so sorry that this is happening to you. And we all know why. It's because of the climate right now, the fact that you're a woman, and the fact that you're a priest's wife. And then she turned to her son and she apologized to her son for not having believed him, for having instead believed the calling campaign that was happening throughout the entire week. And these people were talking not just about the things that were supposedly said, they were talking about things like how I dress for church, which is floor-length maxi dresses with flats and sweaters. This is how I dress for
I mean,
church.
all of this
'Cause
is
the
like,
church
what's
is
there to
cold.
talk about? Yeah.
Yeah.
They're trying to find something.
Oh God, everything. I mean, everything.
So take us from there. So
So-
this happens.
Yeah.
You're
So,
a wreck.
and I will also say at the end of it, I did speak.
Oh.
There was just hardly anybody left in the church to hear it, but I did. And what I said was, I am so sorry.
Mhm.
I'm so sorry that I have apparently not cultivated a relationship with you where you felt that you could trust me to come and speak to me, because I got not a single text, not a single phone call, and none of you have asked me ever what it is that I do for a living. Because
Good
I
for
would be
you.
more than happy to talk about it, but nobody's asked. You all assume what I do for a living.
I don't know if I could have said that without
I
sobbing
know.
my eyes out. I would
Oh,
have been
I
so
was.
emotional.
I mean, I was crying, but I was also really angry at that point.
Oh, yeah.